Hi, everybody. This is Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy, and this is a re-recording of an updated webinar training on management reviews. The original title hasn't changed. It's how to conduct a more effective management review, but there's been many years that have gone by. I think it was originally recorded in something like 2013. So it was predating the 2016 version of ISO 1345, and there was a lot of things that were a little bit out of date. Even though the management review process really hasn't changed, some of the specific references to the ISO standard had been updated. So this is all brand new updates to make sure everything complies with ISO 1345 2016, and it of course complies with the FDA QSR section 820.20. So if you have any questions throughout this training, for those live participants, you can unmute your mic, or you can put something in the chat box. And then for anybody that's listening to the recording, my email is included at the bottom of every slide, so you can certainly email me. And on our Contact Us page for medicaldeviceacademy.com, contact us. I think it's called Contact Us 3 or something. But the Contact Us menu selection at the top of the screen allows you to go to our Contact Us page and schedule a meeting using the Calendly link. So I encourage you to do that if you have any questions or want to ask confidential information about your company. In particular, companies struggle a lot with establishing their initial quality objectives. So let me know. This is something, if you follow the template, you should have no problems and you shouldn't get nonconformities from your auditor. But it's also, if you've never done it before, it's easy to misinterpret some of the items. So pay attention. Okay, let's see if we can advance the slide. There we go. So the goals of this webinar are to avoid nonconformities or FDA 483s, which is the FDA form number for when you get an inspection finding from an FDA inspector. So we're trying to avoid those, and this should be something that's easily avoidable. Also, we're supposed to improve our process efficiency. The way I actually learned how to do this is I had a boss the first time I was a quality manager. He said, I want you to do more frequent management reviews. And he took that to an extreme. He said, we're going to do this every Friday as part of our weekly meeting for the staff. So every single Friday we would have a management review meeting, and I had to go through all the slides and all the presentations, update all the quality objectives every single week. So one of the things I learned to do is delegate. So that'll be something that'll come up multiple times. But when you do it that many times, you get very efficient. So having a template, having a system, you can do an effective management review that meets all the requirements with as little as an hour of preparation and in less than a 1 hour meeting, depending on how many quality objectives your company chooses to have. If you select too many quality objectives, you can bury yourself with work. But in general, to meet all the requirements, you should be able to do it in an hour. But most of them take a little bit longer than that because they don't practice every single week. And then the third thing is a goal of this webinar is to add value. We don't want you to go through the motions of a manager review to meet the requirements. We want you to go through a manager review in order to improve your quality system and improve the management of your company. So it has to add value both to the bottom line and also make your products better. So that's one of the things you're looking for is this an activity just for regulatory compliance, which we don't really want? Or is this something that also is going to add value to the bottom line and make our products better? And that's something we do want. So the first clause that comes into effect here is clause 5.1 of ISO 1345, and it talks about management commitment. The same phrase, management commitment, is also used in 21 CFR 820.20. So the purpose of this clause is to say that your top management of your company, who you have to define who is top management, the best way to do that is in an org chart, maybe with a little asterisk next to each of the people that are top management, and provide evidence of those top management developing and implementing the quality system and maintaining its effectiveness. Well, one of the ways to do that is to have management reviews and have records of those management reviews and show in your management review, this is how we're maintaining the quality system. We can measure it with quality objectives, and here's the improvements we made, and here's how we're doing on the management review action items we identified in our previous management review. So there's lots of evidence in the management review meeting minutes of this requirement. And so the conclusion of any management review should be, yes, our quality management system is effective, and there might be an exception at the end, except for the following nonconformities or the following action items that were identified. So you might have nonconformities that were identified in an internal audit. You might have nonconformities that are identified in an FDA inspection or inspection observation, or you might have action items that top management identified. And other than those action items, otherwise the quality system appears to be effective. So that should be your conclusion, that it appears to be effective except for these action items that we are taking. So nothing, not that everything has to be perfect, but you need to claim effectiveness except for the action items. If you don't have any action items, then it should definitely be effective. But you should always be able to figure out at least something that you can do as an action item from each management review. The next thing is to communicate the importance of the meeting customer and regulatory requirements. So that's a requirement. One of the ways you do that is in your quality policy. You state that you will meet the customer requirements and the regulatory requirements, but you should also have evidence of customer and regulatory requirements throughout your quality objectives. You should establish a quality policy, and that should be reviewed in your management review, and you should have quality objectives that are reviewed in your management review. You have to conduct management reviews. So if you don't have evidence that you're planning them and conducting them with actual records, that's one of the ways that you have to demonstrate management commitment. And if you don't have it, that's going to be a nonconformity. And last but not least, you have to make sure that resources, both people, capital, and equipment, are available to maintain the effectiveness of a quality management system. It's not okay to say, sorry, we didn't have enough money, so we didn't do that. You need to find a way to do that. Saying you don't have resources is just digging yourself a deeper hole. So figure out a way. So this one way to demonstrate commitment to maintaining the effectiveness of your quality management system is to have everybody in top management take this webinar. So if you're a brand new quality manager and you have a bunch of top level managers in your company that don't seem to support the quality management system as well as you'd like, they're not helping, they're not getting involved in the management reviews, one of the ways to do it is to have every single person in that take this webinar. Make them take the webinar, make them take the quiz afterwards, have them read the procedure, sign a training record. They should be doing that anyway because they're participating in the process, and they shouldn't be participating if they haven't been trained. But they will also get the message from somebody that is an expert in quality systems that this is not just the job of quality. Quality is the champion. Quality is the one that teaches, but quality is not the one that does all the work. So you should assign at least one quality objective to everybody that's going to attend one of these meetings. That's another way to show commitment. And you should use the management reviews for business planning. That way it will be linked to the top management's objectives for running the company, not just the top management's objectives for the quality system. If the two are linked together, that's really helpful. You don't want all business objectives. You don't want all quality objectives. You want to find that sweet spot in the Venn diagram where the two overlap. And that's the key quality objectives you want to focus on. And that should be the key points of discussion in a manager review. And then we have this little Rodney Dangerfield classic photo here where he says he gets no respect. And I've had this feeling come from many quality managers where they feel like they get no respect from top management. Show your respect for your quality manager. Show that by recommending a quality objective, offering to actually measure that quality objective, offering to communicate that throughout the organization, and prepare at least one of the slides for the manager reviews to share the load. And it's not a bad idea to rotate the responsibility over time for different quality objectives so you have some cross-training in different departments and get to know the different department managers and different quality objectives better. It's just a good way to run your business is to rotate the responsibility periodically so everybody gets to know the different departments a little bit. Next item, clause 5.2, you should have a customer focus. So in your manager review, it shouldn't all be about money and it shouldn't be all about quality system. It should be about customer. If the customer, and this is one areas where 9001 and 1345 differ. 9001 talks about customer satisfaction. ISO 1345 talks about customer feedback. They're different. If you're going to comply with both standards, then you need to have both in your quality system and both in your manager review. If you have a 9001 system, you're going to talk about customer satisfaction. You're going to do customer satisfaction surveys. And there are a lot of great books out there on how to do customer satisfaction surveys. But I think one of the best ones is The Ultimate Question, if you want to look up that book. But for customer feedback, there is a brand new ISO standard or ISO TR document, I think it is. And I think it's 20416 for post-market surveillance. That's what you should be referring to for best practices on customer feedback. So if you're not sure what customer feedback is, it's clause 8.2.1. It's also referred to as post-market surveillance, and there is now a standard as of 2020 that is specific to that. So before it was just in the guidance documents and it explained how to apply that clause. Now we have a very long, detailed guidance standard that tells you exactly how to apply that section of it. So if you're struggling on how to do post-market surveillance, that's where to look. And we also have a webinar on post-market surveillance if you're interested. Next is a quality policy. Now, one of the things you should have in your management reviews is, here is our current quality policy. And if there are things that you think need to be changed, then recommend those changes. Highlight them, redline them, talk about them, whatever during the meeting. Explain what you think ought to be changed. And you should be asking the rest of the room, do we need to make any changes to this? Is there anything that's no longer relevant? If you added a whole new product segment or acquired a company, you probably have a change that you need to make to your quality policy. If you suddenly divested a whole business unit, you might no longer have part of that quality policy that's applicable, or there might be a reference to a quality objective that's no longer applicable. You might have added something that's a major emphasis of the company. Those should be reflected in your quality policy. And if you're wondering where you're supposed to have this quality policy, it is minimum requirement. You should have it signed and dated and controlled somewhere. A lot of people will put it in their quality manual. Great. Another place they'll put it is in the lobby of their company. Another place they'll put it is maybe in a break room where employees eat lunches. Another thing that you might do is you might have company swipe badges where you use that for admittance to different areas or the building. You might have it on the back of that, or it might be on ID cards, or it might be on maybe a special telephone list for emergency numbers. And on the back of that might be your quality policy. These are all good examples of how to communicate the quality policy to everybody in your company. And everybody in your company should understand what the quality policy is and how it applies to what they do. If they can't come up with a single explanation of how the quality policy might be relevant to their job or how their job applies to quality, there's something wrong. Every manager should be training their employee when they first start. Hey, here's the company quality policy, and let me give you a couple examples of how that applies to your job. And at the same time, get one of your FDA requirements out of the way. You could say, here are some potential defects that could occur in your job, and that's how they could affect the safety of customers and users of our product, and in general, the effectiveness of our product. So that's something that they should be aware of. And it could be an indirect impact, or it could be a direct impact if they're on a manufacturing line or they're shipping product. So show a commitment to your quality system, the regulations, and maintain effectiveness of your quality system by making sure everybody in the company knows where the quality policy is posted and can explain how it applies to their job and how the defects in their work could impact quality and safety. Next is you have to have quality objectives. This is a requirement. It says that you should not only have quality objectives, but they should be established at all relevant functions and levels of the company. It doesn't say by department. Some companies don't have departments, but it says functions and levels. So you define what functions and levels there are. It could be for every employee, it could be for every job, it could be every procedure. When we wrote our quality system procedures, our standard operating procedures or SOPs or SYS documents, in every single one of those, we have a section for monitoring and measuring of the process. And the intent is if you buy one of our procedures, you're going to modify that section to be your quality objectives. And whenever you change the quality objectives, you change that section of the procedure to indicate how you're going to measure it, what you're going to measure, who's going to measure it, how it's going to be communicated, what the frequency of updating is going to be, and what is the target. That means you're going to routinely update those procedures as you hit quality objectives. Do you have to do this? No. That's what we chose to do to demonstrate how monitoring and measuring of processes can be applied to all the procedures and how you can establish quality objectives for all the procedures. Do you have to? No, but that would be best practice. So don't go crazy and assign 3 and 4 of these quality objectives for every single procedure, but there is a place in all our procedures for one, and if you don't have it in yours, you could very easily add it to some or all of your procedures very easily, one at a time or multiple at a time. And would that mean you could have 40 different procedures with different monitoring and measuring? Sure. Do they all need to be quality objectives? No, they probably shouldn't be. But you might pick some of those to be quality objectives and all of them to be monitored and measured. You're supposed to monitor and measure processes, and that's actually another slide in this presentation, is monitoring and measuring of processes. And if you're monitoring and measuring, you want to have variable data, not attribute data. So not yes or no. We want quantitative numbers that we can graph. If you can graph it, it's measurable. And that's one of the requirements of a quality objective that a lot of companies fail on first time out. They don't make them measurable. So you shall be measurable. It's not enough to say we're going to reduce reject rates from suppliers. You need to say specifically how much you're going to decrease them, and it helps to know where you are, who's going to measure it, when they're going to do it, how they're going to communicate that. You get the idea. Next, quality management system planning, clause 5.4.2. You have to have evidence of planning your quality system. So it's inherent into the quality, it's inherent in the quality system concept. We have the plan, do, check, act cycle or Deming cycle for continuous improvement. That's a core fundamental principle of ISO 9001. It's planning of the quality system is also part of ISO 1345 in clause 5.4.2. You have quality system planning for products as well. That's in clause 7.1. Do not confuse the two. Quality system planning is first, initially implementing an entire quality system. So what is your plan for that? How are you going to roll out the procedures over time, approve them, train people on them, and start collecting records on those procedures? When are you going to do your first internal audit? When are you going to do your first management review? Are you going to have an electronic quality system? Are you going to validate that electronic quality system? When are you going to, what is going to be the regulatory pathway? When do you have to register your company? Who are you going to get ISO certified with? When is going to be the stage 1? When will be the stage 2? All these are things that should be captured in your quality management system plan if you have a detailed plan. It doesn't have to, there's no template says here's what it shall be, but there are some blogs on our website that give you some examples of what you could have in one. But when you first create a quality system, you should have a plan for how you're going to implement that quality system, procedure by procedure, and the quality manual as a whole. Then, whenever you make a change to a quality system, you should have a plan for that. So you change a procedure like ISO 14971 was upgraded from or updated from the 2012 version to the 2019 version. Come up with a quality plan for how you're going to implement that throughout your quality system. There's a new post-market surveillance standard. How are you going to implement that? Every time there's a new standard that applies to a quality system, how are you going to change your quality system? It might be a small plan that's very brief. It might be less than a page, or it could be a complex plan that's multiple pages and has quite a bit of time and resources involved. It could be months and thousands of dollars. So you decide. And then the integrity of that quality system is maintained whenever those changes are made because you have a plan, you execute the plan, and yes, there should be a quality objective tied to that plan so you can measure whether the plan is being effectively executed. Oh, there was a comment down here. When an employee leaves the company, that's another time you want to have a quality plan. So a transition plan for how you're going to share the responsibilities of that person until a new person replaces them. That would be another example. You might even have an interim person assigned to that role. Excuse me a second, I'm going to take a drink. So next, responsibility and authority, 5.5.1. So 551 is the ISO 1345 clause for showing responsibility and authority, not just for the quality system, not just the management rep, but this is all positions. You need to define who is responsible for the process and what they have the authority to do. If you make somebody responsible for it, but don't give them authority to make any decisions, you really haven't given them the tools that they need to do their job. So what the FDA and ISO auditors expect is an organization chart indicating the hierarchy, and they expect people that are going to be doing certain jobs like auditing to have some independence. They're not responsible for the area they're auditing. You also typically want to keep certain decisions like whether a product is non-conforming or not. A lot of times you want that to be independent, or give that person the authority to make those decisions without having approval of management. There's two philosophies in that. One is old school. So the old school method is you have all the people in quality never report to manufacturing, they report to the top of the organization, and therefore the production manager doesn't have any control over them in theory, and whether they can reject something or not. That's the old school way of doing things. The way I prefer to do things, which is a little more modern thinking and management, is the person on the production line has the authority. You've given them the responsibility and authority for rejecting product, and you don't have anybody else that has any kind of say on whether it gets rejected and scrapped, except possibly one other person. And a lot of times, the person that I've designated in companies will be somebody in accounting. If it's a small dollar amount, let the person scrap it. Give that person the authority. If the person scraps something that they shouldn't have, there's a trainable moment there, a teaching moment where you can teach a person, hey, you shouldn't have scrapped this out. If it's over a certain dollar limit, then you need the controller getting involved because it has financial impacts, and public companies can't just scrap out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product at a whim. You have to have some control over when you write that product off your books as an asset. And so by setting a dollar limit and saying this person here has the responsibility and authority for rejecting product based on this objective inspection diagram, if they think it's nonconformity, we're not going to argue with them. But I don't see a lot of companies working that way. Most companies want to have a whole committee decide on whether it's nonconforming or not. That might make sense if the person's not sure, if the person thinks it's a cosmetic defect and they're not sure whether it's the cosmetic defect is severe enough to whether it should be rejected or not. But a lot of times what I see is a whole entire committee deciding on whether it meets the definition of a nonconformity or not when it's something that's measured. Yes, it's in, no, it's not. If you have a validated measurement process, what are you discussing? Just reject it. Stop processing a whole bunch of paperwork and getting a whole bunch of people involved in something that's clear cut yes or no. So that's one of my philosophies on responsibility and authority, is try to push down the authority to the lowest possible level. And that means you have to train your employees well and trust them. So if you're not demonstrating you trust your employees and not giving them the responsibility and authority, well, you get what you get. You won't have high quality decisions made by employee, and your company won't run very well. So you have to trust them enough to say, yes, this is bad, I'm going to throw it out. Next one, 5.5.2, management representative. You have, for the management representative, somewhere in your quality system, you have to document who is the management representative. And it might be a good idea to also identify the person who will back them up whenever that person is not present. Oftentimes that person has key responsibilities like being the liaison for an FDA inspector or a notified body or a certification body. So you might want to have a backup if you ever want to let them go on a vacation or be sick. You should document somewhere that this is the management rep. You might do that in your org chart with maybe a different symbol to indicate this person is the management rep. You could bold the title, you could underline it, but somewhere in the legend you indicate this is the management rep, and you might even indicate in that org chart who the backup is. And both of those people should be capable of conducting a management review and leading the company through the process if that person isn't available. Because sometimes people get sick for a long period of time, and other people have to be able to take over that job. And so you want a robust process where it will keep on running if somebody isn't available. That person should also be ensuring that the company, all the employees are aware of customer requirements and regulatory requirements and be the champion of your quality system. So that's another function of that manager rep. In a lot of companies that are CE marking, this person will also often be the person with regulatory responsibility. So that's a specific technical requirement. It requires a certain number of years of education and or experience on the job in regulatory affairs capacity. So that may also be your management rep, or it might be a separate person, but you need to make sure you meet that requirement and identify that somewhere in your documentation as well. Now we come to management review. Clause 5.6 is management review. We have 5.6.1, which is the general requirement to have a procedure and explaining the process. 5.6.2 is the inputs. 5.6.3 are the outputs. So 5.6 says you have to review the quality management system at planned intervals. You have to document that. So when are you going to do it? How often are you going to do it? At the very minimum, you should have the next one on the schedule documented. So one of the best practices out there is one of the action items for every management review should be documenting when the next management review should be scheduled. Tentatively, it can be moved. So it's just because you wrote down, hey, we're going to do the next manager review on October 1st. If something comes up and you move it, you move it. But at least if somebody comes in and interviews you or does an audit or inspection between now and October 1st, you have a piece of paper you can point to and say, this is when our next manager review is. You can change your mind, you can document you change your mind, but you have to have something in writing to say when the next one is planned. And the best way I think personally to do that is in your management review meeting minutes, because you have everybody there that needs to make the decision. Make the decision now. Quickly, everybody grab your phone, tell me about this date. Will this work? So that's my suggestion, but you can do it your way, but that I find works really, really well. I do the same thing for planning internal audits. I also plan those during management reviews. So that's another thing I recommend that we'll cover shortly. You need to ensure as part of the management review that you have continued suitability and adequacy and effectiveness of your quality management system and the quality policy. Review your quality objectives, make sure you're meeting those objectives. Any objectives you're not meeting, you need to take action. And then you have to have records of your management review. So a procedure, planned intervals, show evidence of the effectiveness, reviewing the quality policy, quality objectives, and a record of the actual meeting. Now, when FDA inspectors come to your facility, some people are under the mistaken impression that they can't look at management review at all. That's not true. The FDA inspectors are guaranteed during a routine inspection to look at management review. It's what things are they allowed to look at versus what things they're not allowed to look at. The FDA inspector, a typical FDA inspector, will look at the quality manual to indicate where is it defined, what the quality management responsibilities are for a manager review. It'll usually point them to a procedure. The person will look at that procedure, read the procedure, and see if it meets all the requirements of the QSR. If it meets all the requirements, that's one box checked. Next, who is the management rep? They'll look for that. And when is the next one scheduled? They'll look for that. And they'll look for records of the last management review, and they'll make sure that you have not, they don't want all the records, or they're not supposed to ask for all the records. They're just supposed to verify, yes, you did conduct a management review. Here's the people that attended, and you have some record of that and when the next one will be. So if you don't have a record that of who attended the last one, when it occurred, and that you actually have a record of that management review, if you can't demonstrate that in any way with like an attendance sheet, then you're going to have a problem. What the FDA inspectors also really want to see is whether you had any action items, particularly any CAPAs that resulted from your management review. So some will take the approach of outright asking for your management review. You could take the approach of saying, no, that's one of the records that are exempt and you're not allowed to look at that according to the QSR. That's one approach. Another approach that demonstrates you know what the regulations are, you know that there's an exemption and they're not allowed to look at those specific records. What you can do is you can give them a copy of the record, hand it to them, and say to them, I know this is one of the records that you're not allowed to have have a copy of because this record is exempt, but we don't have anything to hide. And this gets reviewed by our notified body auditors and certification bodies anyway. And it meets all the requirements. So here's a copy of it, but I can't let you take that with you. So you can take all the notes you want, and you can look at what CAPAs we've initiated and action items from our manager reviews, but you can't take a copy of the manager review meeting minutes with you. So that's another approach you could take, or you can stare the inspector in the face and say, no, that's not a record you're allowed to see, but here's an attendance sheet showing you when the last one was, and I can answer some questions about it, but I can't give you a copy of the record. So you could take it one way or the other. Some employees like to volunteer too much information. Um, I don't recommend volunteering information that the FDA doesn't ask for. So you want to have a plan on how you're going to answer this if this happens. And you do have the right to say, no, you can't have that. But you should be prepared to give them at least the information of, here's the procedure, here's the one when the next one is planned, here's the date of the last one, here's who attended. And you should be prepared to identify at least, excuse me, you should at least be able to identify some action items from the last management review or CAPAs that were initiated. So here's one of the big updates we made to this training webinar. It's clause 5.6.2. They didn't really add any new requirements for inputs, but there are more line items now. The way they did it is they divided some of the items up and made them more explicit. For instance, it used to say feedback including complaints. Now there's a separate line item for feedback and a separate line item for complaint handling. Regulatory reporting used to be implied in the complaint handling. Now it's a separate line item. Monitoring and measuring of processes and product was one line. Now it's two. I think it was one line item. I'm not 100% sure on that. It used to be CAPA before. Now it's corrective action as one line item, preventive action as a separate line item. So this is another point where the ISO 1345 standard is emphasizing preventive action specifically, just as in clause 8.5.2 and 8.5.3 are two separate clauses. The FDA doesn't do this. They have 820.100 is corrective and preventive action, one phrase. And if you look at the ISO 9001 standard, the 2015 version, you'll find that they don't even have preventive action in there. They've combined nonconformity and corrective actions. So depending on which standard you're using, it might be worded or organized differently. But if you're going to be compliant with ISO 1345, you need to cover both of these separately and show separate preventive actions, or you're going to get a nonconformity. Next item, follow-up actions from the previous manager reviews. Next item is any changes that could affect the quality management system. So this would be including layoffs, hiring of new employees, people leaving the company, any new standards, any new regulatory requirements, any new product lines, any acquisitions, any divestitures, and if you're implementing a new system, period. So all of those would be changes that could affect the quality system. Dramatic growth could also be an example. Possibly introducing a new distributor could impact that as well, because you'd have new quality agreements, maybe new labeling. Lots of things could change just because of something like adding a distributor. So those are examples. Recommendations for improvement is something that you need to cover as an input, and then applicable or new and revised regulatory requirements. Now, those last two or last three have, or last four have always been requirements as well, but this last one, applicable new and revised regulatory requirements, there are special new outputs that are related to that one. So it's not enough just to say this is new or this is revised. Now you have to have a plan. So we'll get to that a little bit later. Now we're going to go through each of those line A through L one by one. So for feedback, I've just given you some bullets. These are examples. This is not a comprehensive list. This includes some of the items from the FDA, the new European regulation 2017-745, such as the PSUR and trend reporting. But there are also some other things in here that are more general and generic. The MAUDE database is in here for the US FDA, but there are other device registries. These are just examples. So you should really be looking at that ISO TR document. It's 20416 from 2020. explaining how to apply post-market surveillance. So this is really your post-market surveillance process. If you also have 9001, you probably want this to be feedback and customer satisfaction, or have a separate slide just for customer satisfaction. Next, we have complaint handling. So I have some suggested items in here for monitoring and measuring of complaint handling, but I have a big red caution at the bottom. So number one, how many complaints do you have? Complaints is a percentage of sales volume. How many complaints are open currently during the management review? And then are the complaints being closed in a timely manner? That is a requirement that you need to close them. It has to be a consistent process. So if it typically takes, let's say, 3 weeks to do an investigation and close a complaint, then you should be tracking that. If one of them suddenly takes 7 months, there's a problem. So you should be monitoring that process, make sure it's consistent and they're closed in a timely manner. But there isn't a regulatory requirement saying you shall close a complaint in this many days. That's only a requirement for reporting. And then the last item is beware of making a quality objective. And specifically what I'm saying is how many complaints. Don't make the number of complaints your quality objectives. How quickly it's being closed could be an objective. And what percentage of sales volume could potentially be, but be very careful with this because you don't directly control how many complaints there are. And whenever you launch a new product, you're going to have a spike in complaints. So because you only have indirect control over this one, I probably wouldn't make that a quality objective. If I were going to have a quality objective related to complaints, it would be how quickly they're closed on average. The next item is reporting to regulatory authorities. Now, this one, I think there is a great opportunity for a management quality objective, and that's the how quickly have you closed or how many were closed on time. I'm sorry, reported on time. So there's a deadline for reporting in each country. It depends on the severity of it as well. So we have 5-day reports, we have 10-day reports, we have 30-day reports, 2-day reports. A lot of them are 30 days. So you should be tracking that and making sure that you're compliant. Usually it results in some consequences with a 43 or a warning letter if you're not. So this is definitely one that this is in your control. And if it doesn't look like you can complete the investigation, then you should report, do a preliminary report, even though you're not finished, and then follow up with a supplement report. So that's the correct strategy. And this is more and more relevant now that the European system has made some changes and they have a 15-day reporting timeline instead of the 30 that it used to be. So you have 15 days to report. The FDA has its own guidelines, so you want to make sure that you're compliant with whatever countries are involved. Audits. So we have internal audits, we have supplier audits, we have third-party audits. You need to know what the differences are between first, second, and third-party audits. But I give you examples of the third-party audits here. They're a certification audit from your ISO auditor, an MD SAP audit, or an FDA inspection. And then the supplier audits would be you auditing your supplier, or if a customer is auditing you as you're a contract manufacturer. And then internal audits are you're auditing yourself to make sure your quality system is effective and to try to catch problems before your auditors do. The second and third party auditors do. One of the things that you might do is look to see what process areas and which audits are producing the most nonconformities. You don't want them all coming from one place. So you might want to look at why, if you're having them all come from one place, that could be there's a real problem in that area, or it could mean you're spending too much time focusing on that area. Could mean either one, but a Pareto analysis is one of the tools that you might use to analyze internal audits and monitor and measure audits. And you might also consider even applying statistics there. For monitoring and measuring of processes, as I've said before, every process should be monitored in some way, and one of the best places to document that is in the actual procedure. It's also a great source of preventive actions, which a lot of companies struggle to produce any correct preventive actions. And I actually provided a copy down there of what I put in our management review procedure. Top management should consider scheduling an audit of management review process approximately 6 months after third-party certification audits. The reason why is you have a bunch of nonconformities from that audit. You want to verify that they were effective. That's a perfect time to schedule um, your manager reviews to discuss any internal audits you've done or effectiveness checks you've done to make sure that they're done before. And if they aren't done, you can implement corrective actions or action plans from your manager review to make sure they get done before the next certification audit. Um, and then the following variables are things that you could measure. So the number of manager reviews conducted in 1 year, a quality objective could be 3 per year. Then the amount of participation, ideally you want to shoot for 100, but you might set an objective of more than 75%. And then last but not least, it's completed on time. So you might have a goal for when it's completed. Um, I don't mean on a calendar year, but I mean on an hourly basis. Is the management review going to take an hour and a half, 2 hours? So this way it's an efficient meeting as well. It's all of these are potential monitoring and measuring quality objectives that you could have. You don't by any means have to have these. I'm not endorsing these as like these are the best out there. These are just examples you might have for this process. You don't have to pick all three. You could pick just one of them. And maybe after you've achieved that, then maybe add a second one or add a different one. Next, monitoring and measurement of product. Product should have non-conforming material report trends. So this is your NCR process when you receive product coming in process inspection and final inspection. Those are the three places where you have NCRs, and those should be reported in risk management. They should be reported as part of your management review, and they should be considered for potential corrective actions. They're not going to be preventive actions because it's already non-conforming. You can't prevent occurrence that's already occurred, so it can't be a preventive action, but you could apply the same corrective actions to other processes where it has the potential for occurring, and then it could be considered a preventive action. And that's where we sort of blur the line between corrective and preventive actions. But the purists, they would like it to not be related to non-conforming material, not be related to complaints, and be related more to monitoring and measuring of processes. If you have lots of products, you only need to review the trends that require discussion or changes. So if you have 20 different product lines, just discuss the ones that are not meeting your quality objectives rather than discussing them all. If you have quality objectives for each line, you can color code them. The ones in green, no further discussion. The ones in red, discuss those. And if you have time, get to the yellow ones. For corrective actions, this is a graph that I had from one of the companies that I worked at. We had a BSI audit and everything looked great right before the audit because everybody did a whole lot of work to make sure all those CAPAs were closed. And then the day after the audit, we had a whole bunch of CAPAs initiated due to the findings from the auditor. And then nobody did anything on the quality system until a year later. So if this represents your company, that's not a good system. So the average aging is what we were measuring here. You don't have to measure it this way. You could measure the number of number of CAPAs that are open, the average aging of them, making sure that they're closed in a timely manner. I don't recommend saying that all CAPAs shall be closed in this number of days, because if it's a design validation that's required, it's going to take longer than if it's a procedure modification. Procedure modifications could be done in a day, and a design validation could take 6 to 12 months to do. Or it could even require a clinical study. But in this particular company, there were a whole lot of names of people assigned, and they weren't getting stuff done. So that was definitely visible to management, and we were trying to break that cycle. And before we started graphing average aging, people didn't even realize how bad it was. Preventive actions, as I said before, best way to find a new preventive action is to do monitoring and measuring of the processes. So I referenced 5.6.2E, the previous slides. For follow-up actions from your management reviews, all you have to do is have a list of your action items that you had from your last management review and color code them. So let's say you had 4 different action items from the last management review. The green one's done, the yellow ones are in progress. If they're on schedule, then there's not a whole lot to worry about. Just keep on doing it. If they're behind schedule, then you probably ought to have it red, not yellow. So I would have red be the color I would use for anything that's behind schedule and needs some sort of action or prioritization or additional resources maybe a reassignment of the action item. Or there could have just been something beyond your control that delayed and it needs to be rescheduled, and so documented in the manager review that there was nothing that could have been done. It was an unforeseen delay, and it's back on schedule, but the schedule has changed. And if it's yellow, it's in progress, and it looks like it's headed on track to be completed on time, and just needs to continue to be monitored. And green means we did it. So those are things that you might think about for how to document your action items and how the progress is going on each one. 5.6.2J, the changes that could affect your quality management system. So new product launches, products that you're obsolescing, downsizing of the organization, rapid growth, hiring of new employees, relocation of personnel or production lines, adding a new warehouse, a new software system that you're using, mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, a new standard that's involved, new FDA requirements, new guidance documents. We're going to enter a new market, like you decide you're going to go to Europe or Canada, or maybe it's Mexico. So all of those things are potential changes in your quality management system. And of course, any transition plans for departure of personnel. Recommendations for improvement. You want to identify during the manager review, each manager should be able to come up with at least one improvement that needs to be made or should be considered by top management. No process is perfect. There's always an opportunity for improvement. And these are suggestions. They're recommendations. They're not musts. It's, here's an idea. What do you guys think? And it should be suggested prior to the meeting, and you might only discuss some of the list. You might discuss the whole list, but they should definitely be presented, and they might become manager review action items. They could also be preventive actions. So it's another source of preventive actions. Your manager review, the recommendations for improvement, those could be preventive actions if they're not based on complaints and non-conforming product. Any applicable new or revised regulatory requirements. You need to systematically cover your global regulations. Let's say you're going to do 3 or 4 management reviews a year. You could review different regulations at different times. That would be acceptable. But if that's what you're going to do, make sure you document sort of a plan, do check cycle. So this is what we're going to review for regulations prior to the next manager review. And this is how we're going to report on it. And this is how we'll check. We'll check during the next manager review if that was actually done. But it's not okay to just say that it's been changed. You need to actually come up with a plan for any changes that there were to standards or regulations. So that's one of the things that has to be an output of the management review, is a plan for addressing that change. Oh, that was one other thing. It's impossible to be perfect, but your goal should be to update the external standards list at least a quarter. That's my own personal philosophy. I try to update them once a quarter. I think it's a decent cycle. And then if you do 3 management reviews a year, you can review this 3 times a year. If you get a 4th one in, that's great. But a lot of times you have one season of the year, typically the end of the year, that's particularly busy, and it's hard to get everything done that quarter. So you might skip one of the management reviews. But of course I did 1 a week, so it can be done. Manager review outputs. So there are 4 possible or 4 required outputs of the management review process. 3 of them always existed. The 4th one was added. The one that was added is item C, changes needed to respond to new and applicable regulatory requirements. So that is a new output. We discussed that a couple times. The others have always been there. Improvement needed to maintain the quality system. So this is where you say the quality system is effective except for the following action items. That should be an output. Number 2, the products remain effective, remain safe and effective, except for the following action items. So that would be an example of how you handle B. C would be the following quality management system plans need to be initiated and implemented based on the following new and revised regulatory requirements. And then resource needs. And remember, resource needs includes people, equipment, and training. People, equipment, and training are the resources we're looking for here. And yes, they all cost money, but saying you don't have any money is not an excuse. So item A, this should include all the suggestion for improvement that you've come up with during the meeting. So whenever somebody looked at a slide, looked at some data and said, hey, we ought to do this, that should be captured here. So that's an item number 1, or A. Next, improvements to product. So particularly anywhere you looked at non-conforming product and feedback, that might be sources, the feedback being post-market surveillance. Those 2 slides, A and F, are going to be where you're going to get ideas for product improvements. And a lot of companies struggle with this, but that means they're not looking closely at their NCRs, and they're not looking closely at their post-market surveillance feedback. And then changes needed to respond to applicable or new revised regulatory requirements. We've discussed this. You come up with a quality plan for each revision to your procedures or standards or regulations. And then the resource needs, new hires, temporary or permanent, training, equipment, and work environment. I forgot about that. So that would be another resource need if you need more space in the warehouse, you need cleaner space, if you need HEPA filtration, if you need a clean room, you need temperature control, humidity control, whatever you need for a work environment, that might be also applicable. So the checklist. This is just a checklist of making sure you're covering the different clauses of ISO 1345. We have continued effectiveness of the quality system, the quality policy, the objectives, manager responsibility and authority, the manager representative, the required inputs, and the required outputs. Those are the things that you want on a checklist to make sure you've covered everything you were supposed to. But if you follow our slide template that we gave you for manager reviews, if it's not applicable, you put not applicable. Otherwise, you fill in that slide, and that way you make sure you've covered all these requirements. Here's an example of how to document your meeting minutes from your manager reviews. So you would print the slide, but you print it as a notes page. And any notes that you took during the meeting, you would put as action items down below in the notes section, and then you print it as a notes page. So here, for those of you that are listening to this now, or in the next couple of days, you will see that I put in ISO 14971 2019. I put in the 24971 guidance for risk management. I put in that ISO DTIR 20416 for post-market surveillance. I put in the new European regulation for medical devices, and I put in the most recent Part 1 changes to the Canadian regulations for anybody out there that's interested in MDSAP certification. So those are all things that you should be addressed in your management review. So if you did a management review, you should be making sure that all those things are covered and have a quality plan for each one. And we indicate where we did updates. Procedure 10, and Procedure 19, and there were no changes that impacted due to the Canadian MDR. There were changes, but they were such minor changes they didn't affect the quality system procedures that we had. So these are the things that you might want to do, but my recommendation is to use the PowerPoint slides as your inputs and then the notes pages as your outputs of the meeting. So if you're looking for a call to action from this training, number 1, everybody that's in your top management that's going to be going to your management review should watch this video. Number 2, create your own management review template or copy the one we have and put your own name on it. And you can update it and improve it if you want, but make sure you don't delete any of the regulatory requirements. You can fill out my survey and get a training certificate. So it's actually it's an exam. Whenever you take a webinar, one of the ways to demonstrate training effectiveness is to take a quiz or an exam. So if you fill that out and then you send that in to us, we'll grade that and we'll send it back to you and give you a training certificate. So that's one way. And you could create your own as well. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, please unmute your mic or put something in the chat box. And if you're looking for new webinars that we've got coming up, on the 16th, we have remote auditing webinar. I haven't upped the price on that. I left it at $129. So those of you that haven't purchased it because you thought it was going to go up on July 1st, it hasn't, and so you can still purchase it at that price. We have a paid webinar for ISO 1345 Stage 1 and Stage 2. That's a bundle, and that's newly updated for to include all the changes of 2016 as well as some stuff that's happened since then. And then the MDSAP certification body interviews, that will be a free one, and that's not until August. So if you're interested in any of those, and our book that's you can pre-order in Kindle, and it's on remote auditing as well. And then contact us. So if you want to discuss anything privately with us, schedule a meeting through the Calendly link or email and phone and Skype. So any questions? I think I got Shrey and Mary on the line. Do either one of you have any questions or comments? Because I know Mary's facilitated a few manager reviews. Oh, we have Mary that left. So I still have Shreya, and I have now James and Matthew. James, I know you've got a manager review that you're going to have to do sometime this year. So do you have any questions? I know this might be a little different from some of the automotive and aerospace that you've done in the past. Any questions? Okay. I guess that's it for today's webinar. And if you have any questions for me, please let me know. And thank you very much for your participation. Have a great day. Bye-bye.